Hello and welcome to the Toshogu Podcast, where we break down the latest news, breakthroughs, and ideas shaping the future of artificial intelligence. For the longest time, the conversation around AI felt a bit like a heavyweight boxing match. We were all just sort of sitting ringside, staring at a scoreboard, waiting to see which tech giant was going to step into the ring and say, my model is smarter than your model.
Right. It was all at the benchmarks.
Exactly. It was an era defined almost entirely by benchmark scores, MMLU tests, and just raw coding capabilities. But we are looking at a massive, structural shift in the landscape right now. The market is moving entirely away from that simple contest of raw intelligence. Today, we're doing a deep dive to understand how the AI market is rapidly transforming into a complex, three-layered battleground. We're talking about a war for compute infrastructure, a race for institutional distribution, and finally, the fight for workflow ownership. Let's begin.
It really is a complete paradigm shift. I mean, we have to stop analyzing this space through the lens of traditional software as a service.
Yeah.
Because we aren't just talking about software anymore. We're talking about the physical, geopolitical, and honestly, the institutional bedrock of the future global economy.
Which means we really need to start our analysis at the literal bedrock. Like the absolute foundation of this new three-layered battleground is the physical hardware.
That's heavy metal.
Yeah, the silicon, the metal, the massive cooling systems, and just the staggering amount of electrical power required to actually run the future. We are tracking a massive deployment happening right now with a company called Firebird.
Right.
They are actively turning Armenia into this massive AI compute hub for the entire CIS region, which, includes a huge portion of Eastern Europe and Asia.
The sheer physical scale of what is happening in Armenia requires a total reset of how we think about data centers. I mean, when we talk about AI factories, we often throw around large numbers, but the engineering reality of this project is just staggering.
Yeah.
We are looking at a deployment plan for over 70,000 NVIDIA Rubin and Blackwell GPUs.
70,000. I mean, that's insane. And to power an architecture like Blackwell, which draws massive amounts of electricity just to operate at peak bandwidth, Firebird is targeting 300 megawatts of capacity by the end of 2027.
Which is already huge.
Right. But their broader regional roadmap stretches to 2 gigawatts.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. Because a gigawatt is not a software metric.
No, not at all.
That's like aluminum smelting scale.
Yeah.
It means these AI hubs are competing with small cities for grid capacity. We have to stop thinking about AI as just, renting cloud space from a tech giant. We need to start treating AI compute like national energy grids or legacy telecom networks.
Building on that industrial reality, the strategic layer is what truly matters here. What we are witnessing is the realization that AI compute is no longer just a commercial cloud commodity.
Right. It's bigger than that.
Exactly. It is a sovereign strategic asset. Countries and regional operators are looking at AI infrastructure and realizing that if they don't have it within their borders, or at least within their immediate geopolitical sphere of influence, they are entirely dependent on foreign powers for the basic engine of the 21st century economy.
And this requires massive centralization, doesn't it? Because I think a lot of people wonder why you need 70,000 GPUs in one exact location. Like, why not just distribute them across the globe in smaller data centers?
It's a latency issue.
Yeah. To train and run these frontier models, the GPUs need to talk to each other in real time, synchronously.
Yeah.
That's why NVIDIA's NVLink technology is so critical. It allows tens of thousands of chips to act like one giant brain.
Right.
You physically cannot do that if the chips are separated by thousands of miles of latency.
That is the core architectural constraint driving this infrastructure mode. You need massive, contiguous, heavily cooled clusters. If you don't control that centralized compute, you don't control your economic destiny. This is why a project of this magnitude in Armenia serving the CIS region is so critical. It's built with NVIDIA accelerated computing and Dell infrastructure, providing that top-tier synchronous performance you mentioned. The hardware is just the means to an end. The end is sovereign capability.
There is also a very specific strategic maneuver happening here regarding NVIDIA, though. NVIDIA is obviously supplying those 70,000 GPUs. But they're also planning to invest in this Firebird project alongside an early investor, CoreWeave.
Yes, that's a key detail.
Which feels like they're double dipping, right? I mean, they are the hardware supplier, but they're also funding the company buying their hardware. If I'm looking at this structurally, NVIDIA isn't just selling picks and shovels during a gold rush. They are buying equity in the mines.
It is an incredibly sophisticated ecosystem play. NVIDIA is operating far beyond the traditional boundaries of a chip designer right now. They are acting as an AI infrastructure architect. By investing in the sovereign compute providers who are deploying their hardware, they are locking in their leverage.
So even if the title of best frontier model rotates every 6 months, between OpenAI, Anthropic, or Google, NVIDIA still wins because the foundational compute layer, the actual physical tracks the train is running on, remains locked into their proprietary CUDA software and NVLink networking.
What is even more crucial about your point is the downstream lock-in. Once a massive regional grid like Firebird is built on NVIDIA architecture, the companies that rent that compute naturally optimize their software for it.
It just becomes the default.
Exactly, and we are already seeing heavy hitters validating this model. Perplexity, for example, is cited as an early customer using this Firebird infrastructure in Armenia for their AI agent and answer engine workloads.
Which is the perfect use case, right? Because an answer engine like Perplexity doesn't just retrieve a document. It uses complex multi-step agentic workflows to synthesize information in real time. It's scraping the web, reasoning through the data, and formatting an answer all at once.
And that requires an incredibly compute-hungry, low-latency environment.
Yeah, it proves the demand for sovereign-level infrastructure.
Yeah.
The hyperscalers are literally laying the physical fiber optic cables of the intelligence age.
But, generating a gigawatt of compute is completely useless if it just sits in a vacuum.
Oh, for sure. Once a nation or a region builds this massive power plant, they have to actually wire it into their society's institutions. And that organically transitions us to the second layer of this battleground, which is institutional distribution.
Right.
We have a fascinating document in our sources today for this deep dive. OpenAI recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, with the state of South Australia, right after holding a strategic meeting in San Francisco.
This represents the crucial move up the stack. Once the infrastructure is secured, the battle shifts to who gets to be the default operating system for the institutions running on that infrastructure.
Let me push back on this state-level distribution concept for a second, though. If I'm the premier of South Australia, wiring my healthcare systems, agricultural networks, and defense infrastructure into a closed-source ecosystem controlled by a San Francisco lab seems like, well, a massive strategic vulnerability.
So it's definitely a risk.
Right. Wait, isn't OpenAI just selling ChatGPT subscriptions and API tokens? Why are they sitting down with state governments? How does a sovereign nation justify handing over the keys to its institutional data plumbing to a private foreign entity? Aren't they just trading one dependency for another?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that tension is at the absolute heart of this transition. It's a calculated geopolitical trade-off.
Okay, how so?
Nations are realizing that the risk of technological stagnation, literally falling a decade behind in industrial efficiency, outweighs the risk of foreign vendor lock-in. This agreement with South Australia is not just a bulk software license for government laptops.
Yeah, that's what caught my eye.
It explicitly covers developing AI skills in the broader workforce, accelerating local research, and integrating AI into critical sectors like healthcare, defense, agriculture, and manufacturing.
So it's essentially an economic development treaty masked as a software deal.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. OpenAI is attempting to become the foundational operating layer for an entire region's society. Think about how this cascades.
Right.
If you embed your AI architecture into the local universities, the graduating engineers natively build on your API. If you integrate with the agricultural sector, suddenly your models are processing telemetry data from state water management systems and automated farm equipment.
So if I'm understanding this institutional moat correctly, it's entirely about astronomical switching costs.
Sure.
If South Australia spends 5 years aligning its defense procurement workflows and its healthcare diagnostic protocols to OpenAI-specific governance structures and API calls, they are completely locked in.
Yes, exactly. And this is why the benchmark wars are becoming obsolete. Let's say next year, a competing lab releases a model that scores, 2% higher on a standardized coding test than OpenAI's current model.
Which happens all the time.
Right. In a vacuum, you would switch to the smarter model. But if you are a state government with thousands of customized operational workflows deeply intertwined with OpenAI's architecture, you aren't going to tear all that down. You aren't going to retrain your workforce and rewrite your security protocols just for a slight bump in raw intelligence.
The smartest model doesn't matter if you are already fully wired into the state's plumbing. You are essentially immune to a competitor simply winning a benchmark test.
The competitive game has expanded beyond benchmark deltas. It is decided by who can create long-duration institutional adoption at the national level.
So while OpenAI is maneuvering from the top down, through state-level diplomacy and enterprise lock-in, there is an equally aggressive but entirely different game being played from the bottom up. And this forms the other side of the distribution coin, this grassroots engine driven by developer velocity and real-time social networks.
It's a completely different approach.
Yeah, our sources highlight a recent event run by xAI. They hosted a massive 12-hour Growkathon in San Francisco.
This is a phenomenal contrast to the state-level MOU approach. It is entirely focused on frictionless developer adoption and immediate consumer feedback.
I really want to focus on the time frame here, because 12 hours is practically a blink of an eye in software development.
Yeah.
Selected builders were invited into a room, handed access to the absolute latest Grok 4.5 models, given the keys to X's API, and were instructed to build and ship fully functioning live applications in a single half-day sprint.
It's incredibly fast.
It is, but the hackathon format itself isn't the breakthrough.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The magic here is the closed loop. xAI possesses a distribution surface that Anthropic and OpenAI simply do not have, which is a massive, real-time, global social network in X.
X is the true differentiator. When you combine raw model access with a massive distribution surface and activate it through developers, you are no longer just selling an AI tool.
Right.
You are orchestrating a continuous feedback engine.
Let me see if I can map out how this loop actually functions mechanically. First, you have this massive fire hose of real-time text, images, and context flowing constantly from X. That data feeds into the Grok model, giving it an up-to-the-second understanding of global events, which is something a static model trained on data from last year simply cannot compete with.
Exactly. The freshness of the data is key.
Then, a developer uses that Grok model to power a new application, say an automated financial sentiment analyzer. Because they have the X API, that application is immediately deployed back onto the X platform.
Where the users are already waiting.
Exactly. Millions of users interact with it, which generates fresh behavior data, which flows right back into Grok. Data feeds the model powers the app drives usage on the network, and the usage generates more data.
It operates as a perpetual motion machine for real-time intelligence. This structural reality should entirely change how we classify xAI.
Yeah, they're not just a chatbot.
No, they are not just another model vendor selling API access in a vacuum. By using X as a native distribution layer, xAI is competing on a completely different axis. They are a real-time intelligence engine where the speed of the feedback loop itself becomes the moat.
It's incredible to see these three distinct macro strategies taking shape. You have the infrastructure moat, where players like NVIDIA and sovereign compute hubs like Firebird in Armenia are locking up the scarce physical hardware and the energy grid.
The literal power plants.
Yeah. Then you have the distribution moat, which is fracturing into two distinct paths. You've got OpenAI locking in the slow, high-value institutional layer through governments, and xAI cornering the fast, real-time consumer layer through X.
And of course, Microsoft, Google, and Meta are doing the same with their respective enterprise and consumer platforms.
Right. The tech giants and sovereign nations are systematically dividing up the physical bedrock and the distribution pipelines.
Which leaves a very big question for everyone else.
Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate question for our listeners. So what does this all mean for you? If hyperscalers own the infrastructure and sovereign agreements or massive social networks own the distribution, where does the individual builder fit in?
Right.
If you are leading a product team, starting a business, or trying to deploy AI in your own company, and you don't have billions of dollars to build a gigawatt AI factory, what is your play?
It is the single most critical strategic question for anyone building in this space right now, and the answer lies in the third layer of this battleground, the workflow moat.
Okay, break that down for us.
If you are building software or services today, your safest and most durable position is to own the specific high-value customer outcome.
So if I'm understanding this workflow moat correctly, it means I shouldn't just build like a fancy user interface wrapped around a single provider's API key. Because if my entire product is just ChatGPT but with a blue background, the moment OpenAI updates their own interface to do what I do, my business evaporates overnight.
Precisely. Raw model capability is incredibly powerful, but it is not a defensible business model on its own.
Right.
We see how potent raw intelligence is becoming. Just look at the strict cybersecurity controls recently placed on technologies like OpenAI Astra. The labs know these unconstrained models are immensely powerful. But access and raw power are rapidly becoming commoditized. To survive, you must build model-agnostic tools.
Meaning the AI engine driving the software should be completely swappable without the end user ever noticing.
Yes. Your differentiation must come from proprietary methodology, specialized data, and accumulated user context.
Give me an example of what that looks like in practice.
Sure, let's look at a practical example. Imagine you are building an AI-powered platform for architectural design and city planning. Your competitive moat is not the specific generative AI model drafting the blueprints.
Right, because anyone can rent that model.
Exactly. Your true moat is the database of thousands of highly specific, localized building codes, municipal zoning laws, and historical material costs that you've meticulously integrated into the platform.
So the AI is just the back-end processor, but the proprietary data is the actual asset.
Furthermore, your moat is the accumulated history of your users' past projects. If an architectural firm has spent 2 years building up their entire operational context, their specific design preferences, and their team's collaborative workflow inside your application, they have massive inertia.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They're not going to rip out their entire operational system just because a competitor uses a slightly newer AI model that generates images 3 seconds faster.
Because you own the workflow. You own the deeply ingrained customer relationship. The AI is simply the electricity powering your unique specialized machine. That framework clears up so much of the noise in the industry right now.
It really does.
We've gone from a world where everyone was just staring at the smartest brain in a jar to a world where the ultimate winners are the ones building the nervous system that connects that brain to the real physical economy.
And as we move forward, that nervous system is going to become increasingly complex and deeply integrated into our national identities, which honestly leaves us with a rather profound geopolitical thought to consider as we watch these sovereign infrastructure projects and institutional distributions unfold.
Let's hear it.
If AI is truly becoming our sovereign infrastructure, much like our physical energy grids or our telecommunication networks, and if the deployment architecture determines how we actually interact with information, what happens to global collaboration? We are looking at a very near future where different regions, different nations are running on entirely different state-sponsored AI operating systems.
With entirely different biases and rule sets.
Exactly. The real-time data loops, the institutional governance protocols, and the fundamental logic pathways of these systems will be distinct. When the primary tools we use to synthesize reality are inherently tied to sovereign strategy, how will we reconcile different versions of ground truth on a global scale?
That is a fascinating and highly strategic question to sit with. I mean, if the baseline of how a society processes information is fundamentally different depending on which national AI grid they're plugged into, finding common ground on global issues gets exponentially harder.
It changes everything about diplomacy.
For sure. We started this conversation talking about a simple contest of benchmark scores, but we've ended up staring at a deeply fragmented, highly strategic global grid. That's all for today's episode of the Toshogu Podcast. If you enjoyed it, like this episode, subscribe, and join us next time for the latest in AI. Until then, keep building what outlives you.